If you're going to be an entrepreneur, this is the craziest roller coaster ride you are going to go on. It affects every facet of your life. You might not get married. I haven't got married. I got 7 kids, but they're all portfolio company investments. They're not actual humans. So you kind of recalibrate and, you miss certain parts of life that maybe you thought you could focus on, and you kind of waiting until, all right, after I get through this deal, I'm going to normalize my life. And you realize that this is your life.
This is Net Learnings, the podcast that keeps finance and banking professionals ahead of the curve. In each episode, we focus on career growth and practical advice while mixing in the occasional war story. Join us as we tap into the minds of leaders and experts at some of the world's most notable financial services firms and enterprises. Let's get started.
This is a reminder that the views and opinions expressed by our guest today are his own. They do not necessarily reflect those of his firm, and nothing discussed in this interview should be interpreted as trading or investing advice. This podcast format is intended for educational purposes only. Hello and welcome to Net Learnings. I'm your host, Kyle Peterty. We have another terrific guest today, Pete Moore. Pete has an MBA from Harvard, and he brings nearly 30 years of investment banking and entrepreneurial experience. Since its founding in 2010, Pete has served as managing director of a New York-based boutique private equity firm and consultancy called Integrity Square. The firm works with entrepreneurs and businesses in the Halo category. He's a published author. His book is called Time to Win Again, which we'll talk about later. And he also hosts a podcast that's very popular, particularly in the health and fitness space. Pete, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thanks. I'm going to hire you as my publicist, so I appreciate that.
All right. Yeah, my pleasure. This is great. Look, we have a lot to unpack here. I think maybe for context, before we get into the broader discussion, let's start with HALO. It's an acronym. And for our listeners that don't know what HALO stands for and sort of what it encompasses, can you give us some background?
Sure. To pick up where you left off on my resume. So back in 99, after Harvard Business School, I started working at a firm called Brockway Moran & Partners, which was down in Florida. Right when I got down there, they had an acquisition lined up to acquire Gold's Gym International. Being a varsity athlete, and I guess one of my accolades is I was the intramural athlete of the year back in 1993 at Emory University, 6 sports. Yeah, I jumped at the opportunity to get into this category, which, at the time was just the health club industry, and then kind of broadened itself to health and fitness, and then started to use the term wellness. So over time, I coined myself as a health and wellness banker. And, as I was using the word wellness, I always felt like it was like dropping a dead mic, and no one came to me with an awesome wellness idea. So I went and Googled, where's the word wellness come from? And there was a guy who was a doctor at the Mayo Clinic back in the 1950s. His name was Dr. Halbert Dunn, and he was a biostatistician looking at all the data and basically trying to come up with the antonym of illness. So if you're not sick, you're okay. As you'll see and hear from me, I got a lot of energy. I want people to be amazing. I'm not looking to just keep people, out of the healthcare system. So we're ticking around with some letters and we're like, wow, the word HALO, health, active, lifestyle, outdoors, kind of encompasses all the companies that are going after people that want to have self-care, want to take, control their activities, want to live a healthy, active lifestyle. So we coined the term HALO, and we're basically trying to say anyone who's in the better for you fitness, whether it's food, whether it's service, whether it's destination travel, whether it's fitness equipment, studios, bricks and mortar, workout recovery, everyone's kind of under this overarching umbrella called HALO. And hopefully over the next 5 years, people will say I'm part of the HALO sector instead of saying, I'm in each one of these subcategories. So from a standpoint of our firm, Integrity Square, we're trying to be the advisor to the HALO sector. And our podcast called HALO Talks, and we have a boot camp, like a 2-week business school that we do online since COVID called HALO Academy. So I try to be, as you see in the background here, I got a Batman figure here. So I want to be like Captain HALO. And our goal at Integrity Square is basically try and bring in as much capital as we can to solve loneliness, obesity, and diabetes. And if there are entrepreneurs that deserve to get that capital, they are going to figure out ways to further that cause and create a HALO lifestyle. And hopefully that eradicates a lot of the diseases that people are getting that are all based on their behavior and activities, and we can get people living a halo lifestyle. We're going to reduce the healthcare costs. People are going to be happier. There's probably less, mass shootings. There's probably less people on video games, and there are people that are happier and healthier. So that's our goal with the term halo.
That's a great background context and a very aspirational future that I'm rather fond of myself. Just to kind of connect the dots here for our listeners, our global audience is of mostly finance and banking professionals. So I suppose a logical follow-up question, why should folks in the finance and banking community in particular care about Halo?
Yeah, look, I mean, a lot of groups that raise capital, if you raise $1 billion fund, you could tell your potential investors, which are endowment funds and pension funds, insurance companies, high net worth investors, that you're a generalist and you're just going to do deals that come to you or that you're going to seek out and you think they're good management teams and opportunities. What's happened more and more over the last 15 years in private equities, you really need to specialize in certain categories and become effectively a resident expert, because when you get a book on a deal, you basically have 60 to 90 days to decide whether that's a good investment. We think the halo sector in general has a lot of tailwinds to it that I think people are going to see continued growth. You see that more and more consumers are trying to live this lifestyle. You see kids that are in, youth sports that they're trying to basically perform and train like professional athletes do. And that gives a lot of opportunity for large companies, not just a Nike or an Adidas or an Under Armour or, a Cliff Bar or a Quest Nutrition. Like, there's going to be a lot of opportunities in the sector. So what we're trying to do is basically present the halo sector as a category that if you're trying to raise a fund and you're saying, hey, I want to be in, I'm going to do something in mental health. I'm going to do something in, the restaurant industry. I'm going to do something in the halo sector. Like, those are your three primary, sectors that you're going after. We want people to use our term halo, which is more encompassing than just, I'm looking to do a rollout or a consolidation in the health club industry or in the spa industry. So we think the halo sector is, $4.7 trillion industry globally. There's ways to make a lot of money in this industry. There's recurring revenue streams. This is part of someone's lifestyle. And it's also enthusiast brands as well. So that's why we're trying to basically put that up there and say, if you're raising a private equity or venture fund, you should be considering halo as a place to put capital towards.
Yeah, maybe to build upon that, like you talked about it being a really, really large industry, $4.7 trillion with tailwinds. Like, it's maybe a two-part question, because a lot of investing enthusiasts listen to our show. So one of them would be like, how can the everyday sort of average finance enthusiast get a piece of this? Like, are there ETFs or things that are sort of tracking this space? And two, what are some trends? Like, what are some interesting or emerging trends in the halo category that people should keep their eyes open for?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. We came up with a halo ETF landscape that includes about 50 to 75 companies that if we had our own, ETF, that this is what the halo universe would look like. So we haven't released that yet. We are talking to some banks about potentially trying to greenlight that over the next year or so. So that's a great question. From a standpoint of companies that are publicly traded that you can invest in, you've got Lifetime Fitness, which is the bellwether of the high-end and family side of the health club industry. I would argue it's more of like an urban country club at this point. They're also going big into pickleball. I got my pickleball hat on and my shirt today, which is a big part of the halo sector and getting people outdoors and solving some of the issues with loneliness and chronic disease. So you've got Lifetime Fitness, then there's some other companies that haven't tracked as well recently, but Exponential Brands is a boutique provider, franchisor of different concepts that are out there on the franchisor franchisee side, which the main one is Club Pilates and Stretch Labs. If you look at some of the companies that, were big COVID beneficiaries, Peloton is still a publicly traded company, as is Nautilus. There's going to be several other big companies over the next, I'd say, 12 to 24 months that are going to be public companies. There's a group right now out there called EverCommerce, which is a software company that powers several different types of bricks and mortar groups on a recurring SaaS revenue basis. Some of their competitors are a company called Zenoti. Another one's ABC Fitness Solutions. MindBody used to be public. It'll probably go public again at some point. Daxco is another company that's on the software side. So if you want to play the space, if you want to use like a military analogy, you might not want to lock in on who wins the war. You basically want to provide ammunition and military armaments, if you will, or, like a defense system. So think about those companies on the software side of basically powering the billing, the AI, the marketing, the content management, everything soup to nuts that you need to run a health club chain or a franchisor. One of these companies I mentioned, Wellness Living, is another group out of Toronto that I think at some point those companies are going to become publicly traded. They trade at a multiple of revenue based on their SaaS. There are probably going to be some health club operators that come together and become public companies. That's a little more tricky to figure out, but I can see an LA Fitness or potentially some super regional chains coming together. So if you're a public investor, there aren't that many ways to play the space right now. It's always been that way. Unfortunately, it used to be a bad black eye in the industry. It was a company called Bally's Total Fitness that had some accounting irregularities and was always selling their receivables forward. So that wasn't great for investors. A company called F45 that went public through a SPAC during COVID, which we were always a naysayer on from a valuation standpoint and also from a business model standpoint. So what we do at Integrity Square, we're typically looking through franchise disclosure agreements, which tell us what the unit economics are of each one of the franchise concepts. There's something called Item 19 that's super important. So anyone on the audience here that's looking at a franchise opportunity, typically franchisors that have strong networks and unit economics will publish summaries of what their franchisees are doing from a revenue and EBITDA standpoint. The ones that don't publish it, typically you want to dig deeper because there's no reason not to publish that if it's good data. So if they don't have that, it probably isn't good data. And then also in the franchise agreements, if you're looking at those, there's also a list of all the franchisees. And I've found over time that if you call someone in the Halo sector and you ask them one question, and the question is, if you could do this again, would you? And if they say yes, it's probably a healthy franchisor. And no, they're probably trying to figure out a way to get out of it. And it was a bad investment and bad, return on their time and probably a lot of personal liability. So that answers some of the questions related to how to play the space or how to think about it.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. And an interesting way to sort of triage in a binary fashion with one simple question, right? Like, would you do it again or not? Did you say it was, item 19 when you were reviewing the franchise?
Yeah, so if you want to sell a franchise in the US or in Canada, in most countries, there's consumer protection laws and business laws that allow you as a potential owner of a franchise to say, all right, I need to know everything I need to know. I need to know if there's any litigation against the company. I need to know who the principals are, what their bios are. I need to know all the franchise fees that I'm going to pay. And that's about a 200-page document. In that document, they're broken up by section. So section 19 or item 19 is the area where the franchisor is allowed to publish all the results of their franchisees. They do have some subjectivity on how they do that, which causes concern because they might have 1,000 franchisees, but only 500 are reporting. And out of that 500, they might say, well, all of them haven't been open for this amount of time, or there's reasons why we're going to keep some of them out. But it's usually a pretty good indicator of what the unit economics are. And if you think about a retail location in the Halo sector, whether that's a boutique studio, whether that's like a European wax where it's like self-care and personal care, or if it's a workout recovery or a spa, you typically need to make at least $2,000 in revenue per day for it to be a business that you want to operate and that comes with some type of playbook. So the reason for franchising historically was, hey, I've got this great business model. I don't necessarily have the capital to actually roll it out myself. So I'm going to let somebody else roll it out. I'm going to get 4 to 8% of their revenue. And I'm basically going to give them an operating manual that should result in profits. So a lot of franchisors kind of jump to selling franchises before they actually have nailed the model or figured out what their own special sauce is. So, it's something you should always calibrate and you should do your research before, getting into anything. A lot of franchisors now are trying to sell states or sell large demographic market areas, DMAs. And that is a good system that has white space where private equity firms or venture firms can come in and help someone grow out of territory and not be concerned that someone's going to post up, a couple miles down the road.
Got it. Okay. It's helpful. Is there anything uniquely challenging or even uniquely rewarding about working with business leaders and entrepreneurs and founders in the Halo ecosystem?
Yeah, it's a good question. Historically, I think a lot of the gym owners, if I go back to like my golden gym roots, either had an affinity towards working out, want to start their own business, probably were deciding between opening up a bar, a restaurant, a shoe retailer. Several of my clients had to be like in the sneaker and shoe business. Yeah, and decided to go into the health club industry because that's where their passions were. So you have people that, wake up every day, they work out. I'd say 90% of the people I work with, this is their lifestyle. It's not a side business or something that they don't live that lifestyle on their own. They really are, indicative of the brand that they built or the brand that they represent. And that's important. So I love the enthusiasm and passion that they bring about helping people change lives, including their own, and employ people that, maybe don't want to sit behind a desk, and work at a bank or a consulting firm coming out of college. We were working with a group called Game Plan that provides opportunities for D1, D2, and D3 college athletes to get into the Halo sector, either as group exercise instructors, front desk workers, district managers, salespeople. So I like to call motivational specialists right now. It's not really selling somebody on this. We're basically motivating them to take action, and the endorphins that, and the way you feel about yourself, it obviously raises your confidence level as well. So, the thing I love about it is that people care. Also, I don't have to get dressed up for selfish reasons. I don't have to put a suit and tie on. I usually have my football with me. I got my wide receiver gloves. I got a back end net, and, I'm going on the road. And I was kind of blessed with the fact that I got a degree from Emory and from Harvard Business School, so I can talk the talk on the private equity groups. At the same time, I'm like the soccer goalie from high school, in Long Island. So I'm trying to kind of toggle between, I'll talk to you about all the financial components and I'll go toe to toe with you on that. But at the end of the day, I'm basically like representing, protecting, and advising entrepreneurs doing their first or second private equity deal. And if you don't have representation and you're doing a deal with a private equity group or a venture group, it's kind of like playing chess. You're playing checkers, they're playing chess. So you really need somebody to make sure, hey, this deal makes sense. You're protected. So we use Integrity Square. My firm's name comes from, we used to all be in Union Square down in 14th Street in Manhattan. So we used to always say, let's meet in the square. And then we said, well, if you have integrity, you're allowed in the square. If you're a client of Integrity Square, you're protected by the square. So kind of old school. But I do believe that, an entrepreneur who's doing their first deal, this is the most important asset they have. This is basically their life. And we take it very seriously to make sure that they're protected and that they have a deal that makes sense for them over the next, 3 to 5 years.
Cool. Let's do a quick game. What do you think?
Fire away, bro.
Get to know you. So I call it lightning round. It's not timed, but it's got to be fast, right? So I'll give you a list of questions.
I'm not here to sit around and think about it. I'm going to shoot it out.
I didn't get that sense. In fact, it's funny what you said about dressing up earlier because I even wore my CFI active shirt for you. I thought you would appreciate that.
I appreciate that.
Here goes. The questions are quick. It'd be like boxers or briefs, right? That's not the actual question. We don't have to talk about your undergarments, but that's sort of idea. Okay.
Go ahead.
Let's start with a food question. Italian or Japanese?
Japanese.
Value or growth?
Value.
Country music or techno?
Techno or hip hop.
Okay. What was your first job as a kid?
I used to sell seashells that I picked up in Sanibel Island with little googly eyes on them. And I put little chains on them. I sell them in third grade for $1 each.
Third grade. That's early entrepreneurship. I love it. Text or call?
Text, but I call people all the time.
Okay. If you get on a private jet anywhere in the world, where are you headed?
Probably where I am right now in Manhattan Beach, California.
Okay, I like that. You got a day off, no professional commitments. Are you A, going to the spa, or B, hitting a roller coaster at Six Flags?
I'm hitting a spa, soul cycle, or something active. I'm not a massage guy.
Okay, fair enough. That was good. Yeah, you were good at that. I have a quote, and I'm going to read it first, and I'm going to ask you to whom it's attributable. You are competing in business, not just to live, but to win. Remember, the game of life and business is to achieve, to win, to contest, to learn from the losses, make adjustments, and enjoy the results of hard work. Whose quote is that?
I mean, it might be my partner's Dave Ganelin. We might have put some iteration of that in a book. I don't know if it was an actual, coach or an author. Are you going to disclose that to me?
Yeah, it is from the book. Here it is.
Okay,
I got my
good.
copy.
So my guy Ganelin, who's my partner and my chief marketing officer, scripted that up as part of our forward. And look, at the end of the day, you're in business. Most of us have been either, varsity athletes or high school athletes. And you really gotta, if you're an entrepreneur, you're gonna win every day. You're gonna lose every day. And it's almost like you played a doubleheader in baseball, and you better figure out a way to learn from the losses. Realize that every month you're not gonna go 30-0, and treat yourself like a professional athlete and kind of move forward to the next day. But I do believe, with the book Time to Win Again, that you really have to have confidence to go out there on the field every day, and that you want to win. And those wins might not be, objective. They might be subjective. You might get, somebody that comes in and says, hey, you saved my life because, I lost 25 pounds, or, hey, my kid's been in here doing group exercise training and made the JV team. So you have like these little nuggets of positivity, and you got to stack them in as wins, because if you're going to be an entrepreneur, this is the craziest roller coaster ride you are going to go on. It affects every facet of your life. You might not get married. I got married. I got 7 kids, but they're all portfolio company investments. They're not actual humans. So you kind of recalibrate, and, you miss certain parts of life that maybe you thought you could focus on, and you kind of waiting until, all right, after I get through this deal, I'm going to normalize my life. And you realize that this is your life.
Got it. It's great advice. I don't want to give away the contents of the book. I obviously want people to buy it, but I cherry picked a couple of topics, and I was hoping that I could read them off, and then give our listeners sort of a flavor of the content while delivering a bit of added insight directly from the author. So I'll give you 3, if you could just weigh in on each of these topics. And then if there's anything else you want to add at the end. The first one is man versus zone. This one really resonated with me. I'd love to hear your perspective directly from the author.
Yeah, sure. So, back in high school, I was the captain of the basketball team. We used to play against this team, Cary, back in Long Island. So I was at W. Tresper Clark versus Cary. And there was a guy who was an awesome player. He was like 6'3", was going to play at St. John's. His name's Derek Brown. Was a good friend back in the day. So we always used to play a box and one. And I was the one that guarded him. And I was responsible for him, up and down the floor. And I think he was averaging like 30 points a game. And against us, he averaged less than 10. And I always thought about, when I have a new client, let's take a health club as an example, instead of saying like, hey, here's our personal training department, or here's like all the people that work here, let's kind of just man up one-on-one. So Kyle, if you come in and you want to lose 25 pounds and you want to get conditioned for, flag football, why not make that my responsibility? Pete Moore's responsibility as a personal trainer or as a motivational specialist, not like 3 people that work in sales or 3 people that are in personal training. But I want to be your mentor. I want to be responsible for you. And, you can't zone up on a company. And a lot of people that run health clubs and big membership bases think that the membership base is too big to personalize it. So to give you an example, we were working with New York sports clubs during COVID, and they had lost 100,000 members for several different reasons. One, because they overbilled people, pissed people off, but there were 200,000 members as of like when we got involved on the restructuring. And I said, how many employees do we have? And we had like close to like 2,000 employees, part-time personal trainers. So I'm like, you know what? That's like like 100 people, 100 members per employee. There's no reason why we can't just get on the phone or have a cup of coffee with 100 to 1, right? So I'm manning up on 100 members. But if you kind of look at it, you say like, oh, I can't talk to all these people, right? I just have to like play zone, hope that they come in, hope they don't cancel. That's not the way to run a business. Like I tell people, now that, if you're in the health club business and you're okay with 40% of your members, leaving every year, you're less effective than like a lap band surgery that somebody gets. That's like 54% success rate. And you're like 54 to like 60. So you're basically like the equivalent of a lap band where you should be at like 80 to 90% success rate. And that's all based on you and I having a personal relationship. You don't come into the club, I'm going to come pick you up. I'm calling you because you're my guy, right? And I'm responsible for you just like I am in a basketball game. So to answer your question, man versus zone is there's no reason why your personnel, or man or woman, isn't responsible for actual people and have a relationship with them. And then I say, look, make it hard to break up with me, right? Nobody does that in the health club industry. They think it's just a number, but thousands of people are canceling their memberships electronically or by sending in a certified letter. Like, that is just unacceptable. Like, I want to own this relationship. I want to actually succeed with what your objectives are. And it's on me, not on like our company. So that's the man versus zone.
Such a great analogy too, and a lot of takeaways for the corporate world, right? I mean, having worked in banking for a long time, it's easy to say, talk to our associate team or whatever, but someone's got to take ownership of that relationship. And to your point, make it hard to break up. That's a really good takeaway. So that second one, only hire 2 times a year. Tell us about that one.
I've been part of companies where they're constantly looking for new people, right? So they got job listings out there and they're trying to hire a new personal trainer. They're trying to hire a group exercise instructor. They're trying to hire more salespeople. And the reality is, like, if I'm a team, I remember being in camp, summer camp. Like, if you made the under 16 basketball team, like, there were 10 people that made that team. And if there was 1 or 2 people that got hurt or couldn't make it or something happened, like, we weren't like bringing on new people to be on the under 16. Like, we're just down to 8, we're down to 7 people. Like, we're playing, and this is the team that we're fielding. And I feel like in a lot of companies, they spend so much time recruiting that they forgot the fact that, like, we got a bench, right? And the only way I can get my bench players to actually step up is I have to test them, right? I have to give them opportunity. And by bringing in more and more people, it's confusing from like, how do I actually like have a culture? How do I have people like next man up, as you hear in like Division I sports all the time, in the SEC as an example, like they're not going and like recruiting people that are, used to play and now are, at the grocery store or something to come in at wide receiver. No, it's somebody else on the team. So I kind of look at it and say, look, think of yourself as a baseball team. All right. We're going to have this amount of people. And then right before the All-Star break, we're going to make some changes. And we're going to decide whether we're doubling down and we're going to make the playoffs or basically dumping our salaries in order to like freshen our team for next year. So if you look at teams, there's a consistent number of people on the team. They're all wearing the uniform. They all have the camaraderie, and they're not constantly hiring people and interviewing people. Because when you do that, you take away from actually playing the game that you're supposed to play. So that, I think, is something that has not been implemented in most businesses. But this book is more to like raise the thought and have people think about why are we interviewing everybody all the time. Like, I got a manager, I got personal trainers. I'm actually running a playbook, and I'm like taking time outs like every hour to interview somebody else. But I already got people on the bench, so let me just have them step up. Yeah. So that's where that one came from.
No, that's a good one. Last one, identify your top players for next season now.
Yeah, so a lot of health clubs that are in growth mode, or a lot of franchisees that are in growth mode, they're constantly trying to bring in, fresh talent. There's a guy that runs one of the largest Orange Theories, a very close friend of mine. His name's Terry Blachik, and he's down in Austin, Texas. And in an interview I did with him, he says, look, I can only grow as fast as the talent I can put onto the field. And he's like, I cannot microwave a manager. All right, I have to crock pot a manager. So when you think about crock potting a manager and a person, you got to actually invest the time in them understanding how the playbook works. Just like a quarterback, who comes in, as a rookie, they're not like necessarily thrown in to the game right away. Like they want to be there for a year or two and like get them accustomed to this is how this game is. This is how fast it is. Here's our offensive, playbook, and it's sophisticated, right? So I feel like a lot of companies look at, I'm going to go hire like a general manager from another club, right? They come with their own playbook and their own way of doing things. So the best way to grow a team is always through your farm system. And your farm system are, there's people that, Jersey Strong is an example, is a good friend of mine, Doug Hawhurst, who used to be like an intern in the office, and now he's like the CFO of the company at Jersey Strong. There's a guy who used to be, a personal trainer, and now he's running, personal training and sales for the entire company, right? So those are the types of people you want to bring into your organization, and not necessarily, have people come in laterally, or in banking, have people come in laterally, which usually doesn't work because they come with their own way of thinking and they're not really part of like the DNA of the company. So I always say, let's figure out who our athletes are. Let's figure out who's got potential, and let's coddle that and create our own, franchise players.
Love it. I'd like to transition into a couple of career questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Going back to your days at Emory in the 90s, you were thinking about career opportunities, and I think you started it was a JP Morgan Chase originally. What was it about investment banking that attracted you?
Look, my father was a CFO of a company, CEO of a beverage equipment and food company. So I grew up, I was really strong in math, not that strong in English. Didn't really like to read much back in the day. So I was always looking at finance as a potential place for me to land. Back in the day, Emory didn't have the brand equity that it does today. So I'd send resumes to all the big investment banks and, said I was overqualified. I didn't have a spot or whatever they tell you in those one-page letters. And I was at a career fair in New York that my mom forced me to go to, and there was no one standing in front of the Chase Manhattan Bank booth at the time. I got fast-tracked into an interview there, went into their credit analyst program, and then if people remember back in the day, before direct deposit, they used to give you checks, and my check said Chase Manhattan Bank Mergers and Acquisitions Group. Back in 94, I didn't even know they had a mergers and acquisitions group in the bank. And then kind of just, picked up on it from there. So it's a great learning ground because there's no other place except investment banking and consulting where you can actually be interfacing or supporting a CEO or a management team at age 22. So you definitely hit the ground running. And, a lot of this business, as you know, is, an apprenticeship type of business where you got to learn, I kind of say every deal is like a movie, and if you see enough movies, you kind of know how it's going to play out. And then the financial tools and skills that you need, it's really basic math. There's really not much else going on in finance or investment banking. So it was a great learning ground for me. I'm glad I did it. I was going to take a job as a management consultant, and thankfully I didn't do that because they kind of ship you out I got shipped to Huntsville, Alabama one time as a management consulting intern during business school, and I didn't know what I was doing there. So banking was a great way. And also if you have ADD, you can work at 3 or 4 or 5 projects at the same time, and, they roll off and cycle in. So it was the right fit for me.
Yeah, no, great answer. So Integrity Square wasn't your first entrepreneurial endeavor. I think it was the early 2000s, you co-founded a software company that played in the fitness and nutrition space. Can you tell us a little bit about that and some of the lessons learned?
Well, I got plenty of lessons on that one, bro. I'll tell you a quick story to give you some context. So while I was at business school in 1998, 99, the internet was going crazy. I had worked at Chase and I had worked at Donaldson, Lufkin, and Generette, and I had a couple $100,000 kind of saved up from that and some like bar mitzvah money. Man, I was watching CNBC in between classes, and my dad pointed out that you could buy long-term equity appreciation securities. So basically like long-term options on fast-growing companies. So if AOL back in the day was at $10 a share, for $1, you could buy an option that says over the next 2 years, it's going to get to 60. If you look at that on paper, it's kind of like a sucker bet. Whoever owns the stock is basically generating a little more, income for themselves by putting a way out of the money option. And while I was in business school, AOL went from like 10 to like, 500 or something. So I had a couple $1 million in my bank account. I didn't know what money was back in the day then, but I knew I wanted to get into private equity. So I went down to private equity. I thought I was the smartest guy, knowledgeable about where the internet was going. I went down to private equity. They bought Gold's Gym International, and a good friend of mine who I work for now, and he's an investor in our company, a guy named Peter Brockway, he was leading that investment on golds. It was his first fund on his own, $200 million fund. And I said, hey, we got to do an internet play here. We should do online fitness nutrition programs. We should do sales management software, sending leads to all of our franchisees. And he walked me to the front of the room and he said, it's called Brockway Moran and Partners. Like, you're 27 years old. Seems like I got a lot of energy. I need you to help me buy health clubs, do the diligence, PowerPoint, Excel. Yeah, I don't need you dictating the strategy. I'm not sure why I can't put an apostrophe S at goldsgym.com. And I'm not that good with email attachments. So I kind of sat there for a while, try to be like a good, corporate citizen, do my work. But I always had this itch of hey, this internet's going to change the world. I think Golds is the best brand out there. And I started up a software company. I got a 3-year contract with Golds to basically run goldsgym.com. I went out to Arizona because I needed to find a tech team. And every 2 weeks, I took money out of that AOL account I told you about and covered payroll. Then when the servers needed to get paid, if I didn't have any money left, I'd take credit cards out, because they don't teach you at Harvard Business School or any business school, is it okay to fail? Is it okay to wind down something? And this was my first, foray. We raised some money from athletes in the NFL and some private investors, but the internet was not ready. The broadband wasn't there, and the health club industry wasn't ready for this technology. There was no Wi-Fi, there was no mobile phone, so it was way ahead of its time. And one of the things I learned there is that even if you think you have a great business model, if your client base is not ready to embrace it or pay for it, or there's not the pipes to get it to them, if you will, loading up a nutrition program on AOL, on a 28.8 modem, it might take you 5 minutes to download, the nutrition plan, when now it's 5 seconds. So it was way ahead of its time. And, I basically went all in on this until November 15th of 2003. So from April 1st of 2000 to 2003, I was running a software company, and I jumped around to basically every independent health club operator, as well as all the Gold's Gym franchisees. And I was trying to sell them software. As I was selling them software and have them use our web platform, it was usually in their house because they didn't want to pay for a DSL line or a gateway or a Dell computer. So as things were uploading, a 2 meg picture of their group exercise room divided by a 28.8 modem, I might be in there all night. So they're like, hey man, what's EBITDA again? How do I do this model? Can you help me with this bank presentation? How do I do stock options for my employees? So I was kind of a banker running around in internet clothing, and I was a crazy entrepreneur. So if you said, hey, I've got 5 clubs in Vancouver, I'll be like, dude, I'll be there. I'm going to be in Vancouver. I wasn't really going to be in Vancouver. I'm going to get to Vancouver to sell you something. So I was kind of I had 2 cell phones. One was Florida, one was Arizona. As we downsized, I used to sleep on the floor of our software company, one of those mats that you'd have on a lounge chair. And I literally pick up the phone no matter what time it was, Fitness Insight, can I help you? And I didn't know what to do because I didn't know how to wind it down. I didn't know how to shrink it any more than we could. And then November 15th of 2003, I went to Kmart to buy a work belt for my buddy for his birthday. It was $22. And I literally dropped every credit card I had, and I left Kmart without a work belt because I was all in on my venture. And then I went back to banking literally 3 days later in New York at a firm called Sagen, and basically used all the knowledge I had learned from the health club industry and how these people operate clubs in order to become a banker to the sector, and did the Crunch deal, financing for Equinox, Massage Envy, Urban Active, several Gold's Gym rebrands. So I kind of used that software venture as kind of a second business school, if you will.
Yeah.
And because of that venture, when I meet with entrepreneurs, it's a totally different conversation than you would have with a banker that worked on Wall Street, that works in a financial, Excel model and PowerPoint, and, doesn't know what it's like to transfer money from your personal account into your business account to cover payroll. So it was definitely a very humbling experience. I thought I knew everything I needed to know. And, it's really hard to build a business. And it's really, to your point, growth versus value that you asked me before. You got to build value and actually understand the business and then kind of grow from there. So I'm a value guy, and I don't want to see growth on a piece of paper that looks like a hockey stick. I want to see what frustration you're solving, how much does somebody want to pay for it, and are you able to replicate that or scale that business? That's kind of how I look at things.
Sage advice. I know you have your own book and podcast, and we'll link to both in the show notes. Maybe excluding those, are there any other sort of like resources out there that you recommend to our listeners for career guidance, career mobility? Like, maybe it's a thought leader, a book, a series, or something.
There's a book called The Goal, GOAL, that just talks about how to create a supply chain, how to like operate a team and a group as efficiently as possible, and what you can actually achieve. That's one of my, best books that I've ever read. I also like this book, Freakonomics. It's like kind of tells you like the story behind the story. And I think when you're in a business and you look at business opportunities or you look at competitors, you got to figure out like why they do things the way they do it. And we run something called the Halo Academy, which is a 2-week business boot camp. We've been doing it over Zoom, but as an example for our listeners here, Planet Fitness, their average membership is, $19 to $25. And when I was going through, when they started coming out, I would go to these seminars and talk to the Gold's Gym operators. And I'd say, you got to look out for this company. Like their business model works. And they're like, they're going to be out of business in a couple of years. They don't sell memberships at high enough rates. They don't have personal training. They don't have group exercise. They don't have daycare. And what people didn't realize is going back to like the item 19 that I mentioned in the franchise agreements, Planet Fitness was able to get 10,000 members per location. And they would do 10,000 members by spending $13,000 a month on advertising, where the average health club spends $3,000 a month and has 4,000 members back in the day. So if you take a look at that, and then they have something called an annual enhancement fee or a club maintenance fee, and that's $29. But it's $29 on 10,000 members, not $29 on 4,000 members. So the average Planet Fitness does $2 million of revenue and about $700,000 of EBITDA or club level cash flow. And 40 to 50% of that is with the annual enhancement fee. So if you say like, what's the special sauce of that business? If they did not have the $29 annual enhancement fee, it would not be a good business to own. So as you kind of look at businesses, it's really important to kind of unravel, like the Freakonomics was about, why is the murder rate down? It had to do with like abortion. Why are there, hockey players in Canada, as an example, most of them were born between January and April. Why is that? Because they're stronger than a kid that's born in November or December, right? Based on they've been around for another 6 months, so they're stronger. So those kids actually get to be on the A team. And the kids that are on the A team get the best ice hockey time. They get the best coaches, so there are reasons behind, random, like January to April. Whoa, that's a random coincidence. It's not. It's not random. It's because the development of a human, between ages 4 and 7, if I'm 8 months older than you, I might be like 5 times stronger than you,
Yeah.
So
at a young age, and it compounds over time, right?
Yeah. So I think you got to always like look at a business and say, why do they do it this way? Maybe they got lucky. You go on Southwest Airlines, like there's nothing random about that. Like they don't have seat assignments because they want to get that plane flipped quickly. They don't have like kosher meals or like Italian or Japanese, that you can buy because they don't want to stock the plane, right? They've got only 727s, Boeing's flights, because they don't want to have a spare parts department that has like 18 different, types of aircrafts that you have to provide spare parts to. And Southwest, the reason why that business model works is because all these little nuances that allow them to get a plane to the gate and off the gate in 19 minutes, where the average airline has 42 minutes between hitting the gate and leaving. So Southwest could fly 2 more flights a day than any other airline because of the business model. So those are some of the things I like to think about, trying to unravel, and then say, how can I apply that to the Halo sector? Yeah. And then also, like, unlimited memberships have to be limited. Orange Theory, you get eight workouts a month. Whereas you go to a yoga studio or bar studio, they might sell you a monthly membership. Next thing you know, that person's in there for $200 and they've been there 25 times, out of 30 days. So Orange Theory's making $20 per visit, and the bar studio or the yoga studio is making $7, $8 per visit. Big difference.
Some great lessons there to be had about due diligence. So back in the day when I used to ask people for coffee to talk about their careers, I always made it a policy or like a priority, I guess, to try and add value for them. They're giving me their time, their expertise, and I think that's only fair that I offer something in return. So in the spirit of generosity, Pete, what can I do to help you or the Integrity Square team?
Well, look, we're trying to get the Halo name out there. So anything that you guys are doing in and around the sector would be extremely helpful. If you've got entrepreneurs that you meet that are, looking to get into the space, you got to go in eyes wide open. Halo Academy is really important for people to understand how the benchmarks work and the KPIs. And if you're going to sit down with an investor, you really got to know the history of the industry that you're going into. So I would say those, two things as like focal points.
So we're at time, Pete. You've given us a ton to think about. I thank you for that. Where can people go to learn more about Integrity Square, about the Halo space more broadly?
Yeah, sure. Our main podcast, we've got over 450 podcasts. So when you catch up, I'm happy to be on one of your anniversary shows. We've been doing it since 2017 now. So a full 6 years of podcasting. So that's halotalks.com. It's on Apple, Spotify, wherever you want to go. It's up there. It's one of the top 700 podcasts in the health and fitness global chartable rankings. We've also got Halo Academy, which I believe is the haloacademy.com, where you can sign up. We've got a class coming up in September. That's Halo Academy 101. We usually take 25 to 30 students that are all executives or entrepreneurs. And then integritysq.com is our firm on the banking side.
Okay. Well, Pete, honestly, thanks so much for your time. Really insightful, really fun chat.
Cool. All right, man. Well, keep doing what you're doing. Everything matters.
Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Net Learnings. This podcast is powered by CFI, an organization on a mission to enhance the skills, knowledge, and productivity of finance and banking professionals. If you enjoyed what you heard in this episode, make sure to follow Net Learnings wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit us online at corporatefinanceinstitute.com/podcast. See you next time.